can, let's say, negotiators utilize, or how can these services, let's say, support negotiators when they're in negotiations and they're getting, they often get to a point where things get stalled and people are involved in, there's conflicting demands. Well, you won't give me this, I won't give you that, blah, 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 we're walking away. That happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, how can we support them in keeping negotiations from getting stalled? Is that the question?
Yeah, stalled when things become, when there's issues that they just simply can't agree on certain demands that they have, conflicting demands.
Well, I think the first thing I would do is to set ground rules. Like, you have to listen to the other side. Not just you have to, but we give them distinctions in listening so that they're able to listen from a place of possibility, from a place of really what we call nothing, not my judgments and assessments, but from what's valid for them. So I'd set a certain kind of ground rule. I'd also work with them on having a level of integrity that's beyond what they've ever thought, that they're in this conversation committed to a resolution and they're committed to results, not putting it off until later or taking my marbles and going home because I don't like what you're saying. But I'm staying in this conversation no matter what, and we're going to resolve it. With my husband, we argue like most married people, but we don't argue non-productively. We argue with a commitment to resolving whatever the issue is. I mean, really resolving it so that we can say everything and that we don't go to bed mad, that we get it complete, we get it resolved. And so I know two married people can do it, groups of people can.
What if one side to this is committed to going the distance, but the other side, doesn't buy into that?
Then you don't have the conversation. You got to have both sides agree to certain things so that you can have the conversation. I would have a mediator there. Even if you get upset, which people do, even if you adamantly believe your side is right, you agree, stay in the conversation, even if you have to have more than one meeting, so that the issue, whatever it is, has at least an interim resolution, and you try something, and then you try the next thing. You might not come up with the perfect solution right away, but as long as you're talking, and as long as you're listening, and as long as you're open, you can work toward a resolution rather than I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm leaving.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what about situations? There's been negotiations in different international theater, so to speak. Let's say, like with North Korea, where they or others have agreed to certain things, and they finish the negotiations, and then going forward, they quickly break their agreements all over the place. How do you deal with that? I mean, how can that be shifted?
That happens, and it happens everywhere. People break their agreements, and I think you have to do a lot of work on integrity, which that's a long conversation. It's not just being honest. It includes doing what you said you're going to do, being willing to be held to account, and understanding that the breakthroughs that you want won't happen without a high level of integrity. It just won't happen. Without integrity, nothing works. So when you bring a high level of integrity to your word, doing what you said you're going to do, being willing to be held to account, being responsible that it's up to you to fulfill on what you said. You're not going to blame somebody else, and you're going to hold others to account. That's the start. Like I said, it's not a panacea. There's a lot of work to do, and developing people and understanding this takes something. But they get it. We've done enough work to know that people really do get it.
What was I going to say? What about these situations? So let's say one of the things that's going on currently is that there's all this back and forth with Iran, and again, Iran with the Western countries, with the U.S. and others, where people, are having the view, some, that these efforts to, when Iran, let's say, will agree to having negotiations, and then nothing's accomplished, and then they don't want to have, one side or the other doesn't want to have negotiations for a while, then they come back again. You know, a lot of people take the view that these are deception tactics, like, okay, we'll keep this going so you won't bother us with something else we're trying to do that you don't know about. And I think it's been the case with the North Korean situation and several others.
So the question is, what happens if they just keep putting things off and they don't, and they think the other side is deceiving them?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I'll tell you what I think. First of all, people do what they do, and they don't do what they don't do. And if you don't find out what's really going on, you can't do anything. You've got to have two sides willing to be open with each other, and that takes some work right off the bat. Second thing is people in certain, almost everywhere, they want what they want. It's the infantile will to power. I want, therefore I should have, and I'm going to bulldoze everybody else until I get what I want. When people understand that that's acting like a baby, which it is, and I could shift that to be more adult and more cooperative so that it can work for us and you, so you create a you and them culture, not a you and me culture, not me versus you. And they get interested in that. People can have their religions, they can have their governments, they can have their points of view and know that they're valid. I think it all boils down to fear. Like, you're going to take something from me, and if you do, then I'm going to lose, and I don't want to lose. So the shift in the conversation would be, together we can create a world that works, and it has to be together. It can't be me versus you, because it won't work that way, and it's going to take a lot of conversations and integrity to do that, and it'll take both sides being understanding. And this isn't anything new. People know that. It's just in practice it hasn't worked because no one's been listening. No one wants to hear the other view, and you have to do that.
Wow. Yeah, when I think about these problems, I'm always, it just seems that a lot of people refuse to even entertain the idea that some other government who's doing things that are, often very inhumane or detrimental to their own citizens, etc. It's hard for governments that don't operate in certain ways to assume that there's any possibility of getting through to those people. And the only tactic they seem to pursue is this whole carrot and stick business. Well, if we can't offer you a good deal, if we can't bribe you, or give you incentives, if that's not going to work, and then if we can't, then passing that, if we can't force you, intimidate you, isolate you, sanction you, then we're going to go to war at some point.
Right.
That's the scenario. So it just seems that the tactic is often, well, how can we, there's something wrong with you, you're the problem, how are we going to change you? And it just, goes downhill. I mean, how do you get one side to get that the other side, as bad as their behavior may be, actually may have some positive motivations that would be beneficial to all?
Well, one of the things we work in organizations on is performance. Performance is critical to all organizations. And we found, with research that our colleagues have done through the Barbados group, we found that performance is a function of the actions people take, which is clear to everybody. But actions are always correlated to the way the world occurs for people. So on each side, the way the adversary occurs just dictates what actions they're going to take. When you can clearly distinguish the way the enemy or the adversary or the other side occurs for you, you can actually shift it, because the third piece of it is the way the world occurs or other people occur is a function of language. So, I fought with my sister all my life. All my life we fought like cats and dogs until I actually got interested in how I occurred for her. And I started to see how she occurred for me. And we saw that our actions were correlated completely to how the other person occurred for us. And when we shifted the conversation so that I really got she loves me, and that I really love her, and that we're committed to having a family that's loving, our actions and the outcome of our relationship drastically transformed. It was never, ever the same. After 40 years of fighting like cats and dogs, I mean, we did that when we were adults. It's not there anymore at all. Not at all. But the occurring world, the way the other person occurs for someone or shows up for someone, always influences what they act and how what they do and how they think. So when you can get into the world of the other person and see how it occurs for them, and you can see it's not reality, it's just brain patterns firing from the past, and you can shift that occurring, then your actions are different.
I often talk to people about the fact that it just seems to me that, in fact, I had a discussion once with an Iranian ambassador, and I said, well, it's a shame what the U.S. did back in the 50s and all that, and he put his arm around me, and he said, oh, well, that's in the past. We have to get beyond all of that. And then I had a similar conversation at the State Department with these people talking about Iran. And I said, well, what about, all the stuff that happened back then, Why can't, maybe it would help if we took some responsibility for some of those misdeeds. And there was a whole big, angry, reaction. Well, why should we take responsibility for anything? Are they going to do that? Blah, blah, blah. It just seems to me that people don't get that unresolved issues from the past do affect negotiations in the present, no matter how long-standing or how far back those things. People tend to seem to think that the past doesn't really matter today. How do you get them to see that?
Well, you can see that the past really isn't in the present, but a lot of us, most of us, drag our past into the present. And that's what has us be upset, is things that happened in the past that we haven't forgiven, we haven't let go of, and we haven't been responsible for our part in that. When you really work with people on being responsible, completely responsible for their relationship to the past, and that they could let things go, and they could give up blaming people, they could give up accusing people, they could give up justifying why they're right and they're wrong and the other people are wrong, and really be responsible for, okay, now what? What are we going to do in the present? The past isn't here unless we drag it into the present. It's not here. It's in the past. And the things we say to ourselves that are consistent with the past drag it into the present rather than, that's what happened. And we all made mistakes, every single one of us. The United States, every country on earth, every person has made mistakes in the past. But what about forgiveness and acceptance? Can we really do that so that we can create a new future of peace and harmony? That's the thing we have to get interested in. And until one person takes responsibility and says, I'm going to be the owner of what happened, I'm going to give up blaming you, I'm going to work with you so that we can understand each other and how we see things, then something can happen. And not until that. As long as we're blaming someone else, there's no freedom, there's no power, there's no self-expression, there's no resolution. And it takes big, big people to do that, and people can do that and have.
Yeah, I think magnanimity is a really valuable tool. I had a problem with my daughter for a few years, and I couldn't get off my anger towards her for certain things, and vice versa. I finally got to the point, I said, this is costing too much, I had to realize what it cost me to think the way I did. And when I decided, well, why do I need to blame her for anything? So I wrote her a letter saying, well, if I hadn't done X, Y, and Z way back, blah, 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 I'm sure you would have never done this. You're a great kid, blah, blah, blah. Next thing I know, we're talking again after 4 years. Okay, and there seems to be big costs involved when you're not communicating. I didn't get to see my grandkids for a long time, and and there were problems on her side too. So yeah, I think being big, being magnanimous is really a super thing. You know, my relationship with my daughter is better than it ever was.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think that if we could get governments to take the tack that they need to own up to the past without the need to share the blame for anything on anybody, because the costs are too high. There's in international relations, there's millions of people dying because somebody thinks they're right and they think someone else is wrong.
That's right. You know, I worked with a doctor who, his uncle, murdered his father.
Oh,
and
wow.
He could not forgive his uncle for murdering his father. He couldn't do it. Except the cost to his mother and his family was huge. Huge, huge, huge. And no one was talking to each other. They never could get together. There was all this gossip when they talked to each other about the uncle. People took sides. Of course, the uncle's children hated the father's family. It was disgusting. And it took one act of courage and responsibility on the part of this doctor to call his uncle and really forgive him. And when he did, the uncle wept and wept and flew from Bombay to Washington, D.C. to see him that day. Because forgiveness and acceptance is powerful. It's powerful, and it will have people be so generous when you're generous with them. You know, like with you and your daughter. She forgave you, and now she has you in her life, and you're part of your grandchildren's lives. And once one side really is generous and responsible, the other side often responds in kind, but not until someone's willing to do that, willing to be that magnanimous.